Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Last couple weeks we've been talking about the Artificer. First we just kind of went over the new class for Dungeons and Dragons, and then the last week we talked a little bit about kind of questions and answers. And if you haven't watched that second video, just be aware that on today's video I'm going to be assuming the answers that I gave last week are the answers that are going to be apply at our table. So if you haven't seen that one and some questions come up in this video, you might want to check that one out. But when I first read the Artificer and I first read the Battlesmith, I knew that there were some concepts I definitely wanted to try for the Battlesmith. Now, when I talk in the optimization community, the standard belief is that if you want to do the most damage possible with an Artificer, you're going to take Battlesmith, you're going to take a single level of fighter with the archery combat style. Then you're going to take two feats, crossbow expert and sharpshooter. Then you're going to use the infusion for the repeating weapon on a hand crossbow, and that's going to give you the most damage possible. Now, what I've always said, and it remains true, is that when I look at optimization, when I optimize a character, I always do concept first. So that wasn't a concept that interested me. When I looked at Battlesmith, there were actually two concepts that came right away to my mind. The first was I liked the idea of a small-sized artificer that uses their steel defender as a mount. And I kind of figured something like a gnome that maybe is a bit of a knight, so you have kind of a Techno-Knight, maybe with a lance or something like that. That interested me. Another concept I thought would be really interesting would be, because we know that Beastmasters are pretty hard to make in Dungeons & Dragons to be effective. A lot of decisions have to be made very carefully in order to just be effective at all. But with the Battlesmith, I think we can be a lot more effective, a lot more easily. And I thought you could do kind of a Beastmaster feeling kind of character, except you're kind of a cybernetic Beastmaster, because you have your robot dog and then you have all these robot devices all over you. So those were two concepts I thought were pretty interesting. And I asked the community which one I should do. And the answer was both of them, because when I did a vote between them, it was almost a tie. And then I had several comments saying, why don't you do both? And yeah, so I'm going to do both of them. Today what I'm going to be doing is that first concept, which is the gnome that is a bit of a knight, but a kind of a Techno-Knight, robot knight. So we're going to be making that character today, and then next week I'm going to be looking at my cybernetic Beastmaster. And then we're going to move on to the other subclasses for Artificer after that. So with this concept, what I want to do is I want to make it a gnome, I want to make it mounted on the steel defender, and I want to use a lance and probably some half-plate armor and a shield to kind of give it that knight kind of feel. So let's get started. So here we are on D&D Beyond, and I've got the character, and I've named him Gnome Ursi. Then I've made sure to click on my Eberron content because we need to access the Artificer. But I will say that the Artificer is the only Eberron content I'm accessing. So if you want to play this character in a campaign that is not centered in Eberron, assuming we use the flavor text in the Artificer saying that the Artificers exist throughout the D&D multiverse, this should be okay. So when we go into race, we're going to want to pick a gnome, and the gnome we probably want to pick is the rock gnome, because the rock gnome is the tinkerer of the gnomes, because we're going to get the tinker ability. That is ability to use tinker's tools to make clockwork devices, and that just fits with the Artificer thematically. Now an Artificer can do similar things as well, but they're not necessarily redundant. We can do both these things. But also the gnome gives us some good mechanical boosts as well. The +2 intelligence is perfect. And then we're also going to get a +1 constitution with the rock gnome. And +1 constitution also good for artificers. Then we will also have our dark vision. We're going to have advantage on our intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws versus magic. And we get bonuses on Artificer lore. So when we make intelligence history checks related to magic items, alchemical objects, or technological devices, we add twice our proficiency bonus. Again, this really fits nicely for Artificer. Rock Gnome is probably going to end up being the most iconic Artificer as builds continue to come in. Now for the class, we're of course going to begin with Artificer. And we're going to select 2 proficiencies and an Artisan's tool. Now because we are making this character into a knight style character, I can see that they might have to do things like do armor repair or that kind of thing. So Smith's tools I think might be the most useful for us. Now when it comes to the 2 skills, I think that Perception is always a good skill to have. And I like Arcana for this character because it is going to be a magical character. Now when we go into the background, I think the most obvious background for an Artificer is probably the Guild Artisan. So we're going to go ahead and take that. It's going to give us Insight and Persuasion. And then we're going to pick another tool. I think Leatherworker's tools works well for us. Remember, we're going to be mounted. That means things like saddles and that kind of thing. So Leatherworker's tools, I think, is a good choice for us as well. We're going to pick a language, and it doesn't matter what you pick. It's going to be campaign dependent. One that comes up a lot is Elvish, so I'm going to take that with this character. So going into our ability scores, I'm going to use a point buy. Now, with the point buy, the first thing we're going to want to have is we're going to want to have our intelligence at 14 or potentially even 15. That's going to give us 16 or potentially a 17. Now, the only reason I would go for a 17 with intelligence is there is a racial feat that gnomes can take that would give a +1 to intelligence, and then it gives you kind of a vanish ability that is reasonably good, but it's also pretty expensive to do that. So I think we're better off just going with a 16 intelligence to start. And what we can do then is we can also have our constitution at a 16 to start. So 16 constitution is going to shore up a little bit. We're getting D8 hit points, but we're a martial character. So that extra hit point per level puts us on par with rangers and fighters and paladins in terms of our hit points. Then our dexterity, we're going to want to have that at a 14. Because we are using medium armor, generally 14 is the number you want because it's going to give you your maximum dexterity bonus when you're wearing your armor, going to give you the best armor class you're going to get. That gives us 4 points remaining, and those can go wherever you like. I think that having a wisdom of at least 10 is probably a good idea. And this character, as a knight, I think they should at least have an average charisma. So let's make that a 10 as well. Now we're going to take our starting equipment, so we'll choose the standard equipment, and we're going to be able to pick 2 simple weapons. We're going to get a light crossbow, we're going to get scale mail armor, Thieves' Tools, Dungeoneer's Pack. Remember those Thieves' Tools, we can use them as a spellcasting focus for our Artificer spells as well. We're also, as a Guild Artisan, going to get a set of Artisan's Tools, which of course I'll take Tinker's Tools. And then Letter of Introduction from our guilds, Traveler's Clothes, and a pouch with some gold in it. Now, when it comes to weapons, this is what I wanted to come back to this for. We're going to find the experience of playing an Artificer very different from levels 1 to 2 than we are going to find at level 3. Because we can't select Battlesmith until level 3. That means that we will be using our Dexterity or our Strength on any weapon rolls. And we're only proficient in simple weapons. Now, I've got a 14 dexterity, that's not bad, and simple weapons aren't great. So ultimately, I'm not going to be a great weapon user at low levels, and that's just the way it is. But the advantage here is that because the Artificer gets their spells right at level 1, we can be a kind of a primary spellcaster for the first 2 levels, and then we're going to switch into a martial character at level 3. So with a 14 dexterity and simple weapon proficiency, I can't see going into melee very often. But if I do get stuck in melee, probably my best bet is just to go with a dagger. And then for my second option, I'm actually going to take a second light crossbow. I already have a light crossbow, but light crossbow is something that there might be another party member that could make use of, or we could sell it. It's basically an extra. Because we're getting more than we need here, because we're not getting the weapons that we're eventually going to be using. So now we're going to go back into our spells and pick our first level spells and our cantrips for our first level Artificer. Now when you're selecting your cantrips for the Artificer, your first selection really needs to be Mending. Mending is going to be the thing that repairs your homunculus, it's going to be the thing that repairs your steel defender, it's going to be the thing that repairs your cannons. So no matter what kind of Artificer you're playing, you're going to want the Mending spell. So Mending pretty much should always be your first selection. And then for the second selection, we have 2 ways we could go. we could either take a cantrip like Guidance, which is good utility, or we could take an offensive cantrip, like a Firebolt. Now, Firebolt just isn't that great at first level, and it's not that great at second level. And at third level, this character is going to be a melee character, and reasonably good with ranged weapons when they need to be. So I don't think that Firebolt really suits this character, so I think we're better off going with the Guidance. So that's our cantrips. We've got Mending. Mending, remember, it takes a minute to cast, but it can repair broken items. And then Guidance. And Guidance is an action to cast. It uses our concentration, but adds that D4 to all our ability checks, or the ability checks of our allies. And this one comes up a lot. It's one of the best cantrips in the game. Very nice for it to be on the Artificer spell list. And that leads us into our first level spells. Now we're going to be able to prepare 3 first level spells, but just remember that we're going to have 2 slots to be casting first level spells. And that's not bad. I mean, if you look at a bard, or you look at a cleric, or you look at a druid, they're going to have 2 slots as well. Technically speaking, wizard might be able to use arcane recovery to get a 3rd slot, but we're pretty close to all the primary spellcasters in the level of spells we can cast and the number of spells we can cast at this level. So the fact that we're not a martial character yet currently isn't a big problem. But what we will want to do is, as a primary spellcaster, we're going to want what I call a big gun spell. Something that can have a massive impact on a single combat. And there are, as we look through the Artificer spell list, 2 spells that jump out to me as big gun spells. The first would be Fairy Fire. It's a 20-foot cube, so you can hit multiple creatures with it. They all make dexterity saving throws, and any that fail are shrouded in light. That gives you and your allies advantage on attacks against them. So we can potentially set up multiple enemies with this disadvantage for tactical combat. This uses our concentration, well worth our concentration. So this is a strong contender for our selection. The other one I would consider maybe is Grease. Grease also can affect multiple enemies. It's a smaller area, so you'll likely affect less. But they make their saving throw. It's also dexterity saving throw, or they fall prone, and prone will give your allies advantage to attack them. It can also do things like slow movement and that kind of thing. Now, the advantage of Grease is it's not concentration. The disadvantage is, on the next round, the creatures get up. And so Grease tends to be less dramatically good than Fairy Fire. But when you get to higher levels, spells that don't use concentration tend to be more valuable. So this is something I might come back to later. Remember, an Artificer can change out their spells with every long rest. It's like a druid, or like a paladin, or like a cleric. So we can come back to Grease when we want it. But I think right now what we want is Fairy Fire. So I'm going to prepare Fairy Fire. That's going to give me 2 more selections. And the 2 selections I'm going to make, the first one is Absorb Elements. This is one that I probably want to keep prepared throughout the career of this character. So whenever I'm going to be taking element damage, I can use my Absorb Elements and get resistance to that damage type. But in addition, when you're playing a character that is going to be a melee character, Absorb Elements is doubly good, because whenever you take that damage, you can then apply it to your melee attacks on your next turn and do a little bit of extra damage with it. That's not the primary reason we want Absorb Elements. We want Absorb Elements to protect our hit points, but just that added little benefit makes it just a little bit better for a melee character. The other thing I'm going to take is Detect Magic. I have Ritual Spellcasting, which means I can cast Detect Magic as a ritual without requiring a use of a spell slot. Only have 2 spell slots. Fairy Fire is probably going to take both of them. Absorb Elements is one of those things that might come up, probably won't. So probably going to use both my spell slots on Fairy Fire. That's not going to be a problem at all. We're going to wish we had more. So having a spell that isn't going to use a spell slot is definitely something we want to do. So here's our character at first level, and at this level, we are really just a spellcaster. When we're not casting spells, probably what we want to be using is our light crossbow. +4 to hit, d8 +2 damage. That's not great for first level, but it's probably as good as a cantrip was going to be for us. So using that light crossbow has only one real disadvantage, and that disadvantage is we're not going to be able to wear a shield. So that means we're going to have a 16 armor class to start. Until we get to the point where our weapons are one-handed, it's going to stay at 16. Not the end of the world, because if we are at range, we're not going to be attacked a whole lot, and we do have 11 starting hit points, which is pretty good for a spellcaster. So basically what we're going to be doing is, on most turns, we're going to use that light crossbow. And then a couple times over the adventuring day, we'll use Fairy Fire as our big gun spell. So we'll move the character into level 2, and not a lot changes with spells, because with spells we're still only getting 2 castings per day. Now, a primary spellcaster at this point has moved into 3 spells per day. So our spellcasting has fallen a little bit behind, but not disastrously so. Everyone is still casting only first level spells, just primary spellcasters will be casting 1 more. But we will get to be able to prepare 1 more spell. And again, I'm probably going to want to be casting Fairy Fire as my big gun spell most of the time. So I would be inclined to grab another ritual spell. An Alarm is a reasonable ritual spell. It can help protect your campsite until you get more reliable forms of long rest protection. It's a good thing to throw on your campsite so that if creatures are hiding and they move in stealthily and you fail your passive perception, then it will give you another line of defense. You can also do it on things like you can cast it on the backpack that you're holding your equipment in, so that if somebody tries to pickpocket you, it would reveal them. So Alarm is a pretty good ritual to have, so we're going to grab that one. But the big thing that happens at this level is we get our Artificer Infusions. Now we're going to be able to have 2 of these active at any one time, but we're going to be able to select 4 of them. So on different days we might have different infusions active. Now one thing with the infusions you want to remember is that depending on the party, you might find different infusions are useful. Things like weapon infusions might not be best suited for us. They might actually be best suited for another character. Same thing with armor infusions. But with this character, because we don't know what the rest of the party is, for now I'm mainly going to be assuming I'm going to be using my own infusions. And the first one I'm going to want to take is Repeating Shot, because right now I am using a crossbow, and Repeating Shot is going to make it so that it gets rid of the loading property. Not that the loading property was causing many problems. Gets rid of the need for ammunition. That can be helpful if you have one of those DMs that makes you track ammo. And even if you don't track ammo, just thematically makes more sense now. You don't use your actual ammunition anymore. And you're going to get a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls. Because we have a 14 dexterity, bumping that up is like getting a 16 dexterity. Plus, we can now hit creatures that might have resistance to non-magical attacks. So this is a really strong choice for us at this level. Second one I'm going to want to take is Enhanced Defense. So this is basically going to be something we can use on our Scale Mail armor, and our 16 armor class is going to become a 17 armor class. And those would probably be the things I would use most of the time. They're just those little bonuses that are going to come up over and over again. But what I would like to do now is maybe pick some more circumstantial stuff. And if we're doing that, then probably what I want to be looking at is Replicate Magic Item. With Replicate Magic Item at level 2, I'm going to get a lot of choices. And these tend to be things that are circumstantial, which is fine because I'm looking for things that are circumstantial. Sending Stones, very useful. Wand of Magic Detection, useful. Rope of Climbing can be really useful. Goggles of Night, if you've got that one member of your party that doesn't have dark vision, can be useful. The Cap of Water Breathing. Bag of Holding. Alchemy Jug. These are all things that can be really useful in the right circumstances. I have to pick one of them, and I think the one that would probably come up the most often is the Bag of Holding. So that's what I'm going to select. And then the final one I'm going to pick, I'm assuming that I'm in a party that has at least somebody else who uses weapons. So Enhanced Weapon would allow me to do both my Repeating Shot on my own weapon and the Enhanced Weapon on their weapon, allowing me to create 2 magical weapons. And if I do that, then I would probably not use the Enhanced Defense for that day. So at level 2, the main things that have changed are that armor class. We can assume it would often be a 17 unless I'm boosting somebody else's weapon. And our crossbow is going to be a better attack. It's going to be a +5 to hit with a d8 +3 damage, which is now at least respectable at 2nd level. And this will be the last point where I'm primarily a spellcaster. Starting at next level, I'm going to be primarily a martial character. So level 3 is the big level for this character. Now it is going to be a martial character because we're going to take Battlesmith. Now, because we already have Smith's tools, we're going to get a different tool proficiency. It doesn't matter that much what you take, but I'm going to take Alchemist's Supplies. That's something you can use to make like healing potions with. Battlesmith is going to give us a whole bunch of extra spells, and they're always prepared. And at this level, we're going to have Heroism and Shield always prepared. Heroism is a spell that's going to give you basically immunity to fear, and Shield is one of my favorite first level spells in the game, and it's going to make it us very difficult to hit in combat. As we move up in levels, there are a lot of good spells on here. Warding Bond can be very useful, especially if you have a character with a high constitution, so you have a decent number of hit points, or Vitality is a good healing spell. And Fire Shield is a good defensive spell that doesn't require your concentration. Banishing Smite is a standout amongst the Smite spells, one that I think is pretty good. So, as I said, lots of good choices here on the Battlesmith spells. The other thing we're going to get is Battle Ready, going to give us proficiency in martial weapons. And the big thing here is when we attack with a magic weapon, we can use our intelligence modifier instead of our strength or dexterity for attack and damage rolls. So this means I don't have to worry about my dexterity, I don't have to worry about my strength, I just can boost my intelligence. And what I'm going to want to do is have a magic weapon for melee and a magic weapon for ranged. And I can do both because I can give that ranged weapon the repeating weapon, I can give the melee weapon my enhanced weapon, so I can have both a magic melee weapon and a magic ranged weapon. Now in the course of campaigning, you might come across a magic item, magic weapon that is better than what you would create with your enhanced weapon or your repeating weapon. And if so, then go ahead and switch and you can use your infusion for something else. Remember also, when you level up, you can change your infusions if you want to. Now my favorite thing that we get at 3rd level is our Steel Defender. So this is our robot doggy, and it is going to be my mount. So I'm going to want to have a saddle, and then I'm going to want to use this as a mount. Now in my video last week, I talked a little bit about controlled mounts versus uncontrolled mounts. That's going to be important with this character, because there are going to be certain points where we're going to want this mount to be uncontrolled, and there's going to be other points where we're going to want to have it controlled. But the things to note about this is, number one, it's going to give us a bonus action attack, the Force Empowered Rend. Doesn't have a huge bonus to hit, doesn't do a huge amount of damage, but as a bonus action, it's just going to add on to the damage we otherwise would do. And that is going to definitely bring this character where it needs to be in terms of damage, and I'm going to show you the calculations for that. Other thing to note is this Deflect Attack. So once per round, it can use its reaction to impose disadvantage on an attack roll of a creature within 5 feet of it. But it can't do it on any attacks against itself, which is fine. We want the Steel Defender to get attacked. But if I get attacked by a creature that moves within 5 feet of me, then the Steel Defender can provide disadvantage on that attack, which is going to be useful to me. And remember, because it's not my reaction, that means that potentially, if a super tough creature is using a super tough attack on us, we could have the Steel Defender use its Deflect Attack, and then we could use our reaction on a shield. So now it would have disadvantage against our armor class +5. Now the Steel Defender has a lot of hit points. We're going to have its Constitution modifier, which is +2, plus our Intelligence modifier, which is currently +3, plus 5 times our level in the class, which is currently 15. So currently that's 20 hit points. It can also repair itself using our bonus action for 2d8 plus 2 hit points. Can only do that 3 times a day. But we can also use our Mending spell to heal this thing to full. And if it ever goes down in combat, all we have to do is expend a 1st level spell slot, and we're going to bring it back up to full hit points. So like I say, this is like an additional hit point pool for us. And if we can get our enemies to attack it, that's a good thing for us. So Steel Defender is a big bonus at this level. And like I said, we're going to use this as a mount. And finally, we can create the tools we need. Well, you know what? We don't have Smith's tools right now, so if we needed them, we could create them. Or Alchemist tools. If we wanted to create potions, for example, we could do that too. We should also note that when it comes to spells, the primary spellcasters at this point are into their 2nd level spells. This is the point where we now fall significantly behind in spellcasting. But we do get a 3rd 1st level spell slot at this level. We're still going to be using our spells, so it's still a good thing to note that we're going to increase our spellcasting ability by 50%. So when it comes to our inventory, we're definitely going to be wanting to make changes at level 3. Remember, now we're proficient in all martial weapons, and that just changes things a lot. We are now going to be a martial character. We're no longer going to be a primary spellcaster. So if we're talking about our wish list, this is what I would definitely want. Number one, you're going to need a lance. If you're going to play a knight style character, you're going to want some kind of martial melee weapon. Lance is going to be our best bet. Lance has a damage of D12, which is really good for a one-handed weapon. It also has reach. The disadvantage of using a lance is if something gets within 5 feet of you, then you would have disadvantage to attack it. So what we're definitely going to want to do is if a creature gets within 5 feet of us that we want to attack with our lance, we will need to move before we attack. This means that either the mount we're using has to use a disengage action, which is going to use up our bonus action, which means no bonus action attack, or we're going to have to take an attack of opportunity. The other thing I'm going to want is a hand crossbow, because I'm going to want to use a shield now. And a hand crossbow I'm going to be able to use with a shield because of the repeating shot infusion. The next thing I'm going to want, of course, is a shield. So we're going to put on a shield. That one shouldn't be too hard. Shields don't cost that much. And that's going to give us a +2 to our armor class. And the final thing I'm going to want, and this is something I may or may not be able to get at 3rd level, but I'm going to want it eventually, is half plate. Because half plate is going to give us an additional bonus to our armor class. So with half plate and a shield, we're going to have an excellent armor class. So for our lance, our actual bonus to hit is going to be +6. And the reason for that is we're going to be using our intelligence modifier. It's going to have a +1 magical bonus plus our +2 proficiency bonus. So +6 to hit. The damage will be D12 +4. And the +4 comes 3 from our intelligence, 1 from a magical bonus. Now, if we are stuck at ranged, then we're going to pull out our hand crossbow. And it's going to have the same bonus to hit, and it's going to have the same bonus to damage, except it's going to be using a D6 instead of a D12. So it's definitely lower damage, but as far as range damage at this level, it's going to be reasonably good. So we're going to be a little bit versatile. If we want to attack at range, we can, but we're going to be significantly better in melee. Remember, too, that our Steel Defender is only getting their bonus action attack if they're in melee. So what kind of damage does this character end up doing? And I'm going to go over all the levels together here. So I've taken a couple snapshots. If you haven't watched it yet, I have a video for calculating average damage. It's fairly old. It's like a year ago. So you have to go back a fair bit. But in that video, I discuss creating a baseline for damage. And then you can compare the damage you do versus the baseline to determine if the damage you do is effective damage or not. Now, some builds go way above the baseline. This one isn't going to go super above the baseline. This isn't, again, the best damage dealing character we can make. But it does hold consistently above the baseline from level 3. So if we look at the damage, I've done the math here for this character. And we're going to see that our baseline damage at level 3 is 7.65 per round. This character can expect to do 10.95 per round. So from about 8 to about 11. When we get to level 8, the baseline is going to be about 18, and we're going to do about 19. So that's probably the closest to the baseline we're going to get, but we're still over it. At level 12, our baseline is about 27 points of damage. We're going to be doing about 34 points of damage. So we're, again, comfortably above the baseline. And then at level 17, the baseline becomes 35 points of damage. This character is going to be able to do 51 points of damage, potentially, or potentially 36 points of damage. We'll get into that in more detail when we get there. But basically, this character is going to be able to stay above the baseline all the way through their career, despite the fact we're not taking the absolute most optimal feat selections and weapon selections. So what that means is this concept of character can work to be an effective character in your campaign, even though it might not be the most damage you could do. But let's talk a little bit about how this character is going to play in an actual combat, because the lance is a little bit tricky, mounts are a little bit tricky. Now, with this character at this level, I would say that you want to have your Steel Defender as an uncontrolled mount. That means that it is going to act on its own turn, not on your turn. And controlling a mount limits what it can do. It can only take the dash, disengage, or dodge action on your turn. And we are definitely going to want to have our mount contribute to our damage at this level. And I included it in those calculations. So there's a few scenarios that could come up in melee. What we want to do on our turn is going to depend on that. So number one, we might have a situation where we have an enemy within 5 feet of us and another enemy within 10 feet of us. This is the best possible scenario for us because we can use our attacks to attack the one that's 10 feet away from us with our lance. Then we can have our steel defender attack the one that's within 5 feet of us on its turn. And we don't have to worry about movement at all. The other possibility is we might have something that is within 5 feet of us and there's nothing within 10 feet of us. In that case, what I would do is I would hold my action. Then on the steel defender's turn, they would do their rend attack and they would move back 5 feet. This is going to provoke an attack of opportunity. That's fine. We have a great armor class and that steel defender's waiting to give disadvantage on that attack. Then we can make our lance attack. The final possibility is we have a situation where we have no enemies within 5 feet or 10 feet of us. Now we're going to need to use the steel defender's movement to move in range to attack. So then what we would do again is ready our action. And then on the steel defender's turn, it's going to move towards the enemy. When we get within 10 feet of the enemy, we'll make our attack. And then when the steel defender moves within 5 feet of the enemy, it can make its rend attack. So regardless of the situation, we're always going to be able to use both our attack and the steel defender's attack. But in some cases, we're going to have to use our reaction. And when we use our reaction, that means no shield spell, no absorb elements spell. But at this level, that's our best bet. Now, once we get to level 5, we're going to get extra attack. And if you ready your action to make the attack action, you don't get your extra attack. So at that point, we're going to need to switch the uncontrolled mount to controlled mount to make sure that it moves on our turn. So when we switch this to a controlled mount, we're going to lose that bonus action attack from the steel defender. Fortunately, we can replace that bonus action attack at level 6 with a homunculus. But for now, we're going to go to level 4. So at level 4, we're going to get our first ability score improvement. And there are a few different things we could do with this. The first thing that might come to mind is the mounted combatant feat, because we are using a mount. But if we look at the mounted combatant feat, it doesn't really provide us very much. We have advantage on melee attack rolls against unmounted creatures that are smaller than our mount. Our mount's medium size, so that's only going to help us against small sized creatures. We can force a target that attacks our mount to attack us instead. We don't want that. Our mount actually heals much easier than we do, and it has lots of hit points. We actually like it when enemies attack our mount, so we're not going to really use that ability. And then finally, if there's a dexterity saving throw, they can take half damage instead of full damage, which is okay. But overall, this isn't giving us anything that we really want with this character. So although Mounted Combatant might seem like an obvious choice, if we look at what it actually gives us, it's not worth it. Another feat that might seem obvious is Shield Master, because this is something you often want to take when you have a character that uses a weapon and a shield. But again, this is not something that is going to get a lot of use from us, because it's going to use our bonus action every round, and we have things we can do with our bonus action. Currently, we have a mount that can take an attack with our bonus action, and later on we're going to have a homunculus that can do an attack using our bonus action. So giving us more bonus action options isn't really helping us out. The Warcaster feat might be another really obvious choice, because this is something we usually want to do when we have a caster that uses a shield and a weapon. And it gives us advantage on our constitution saving throws to maintain our concentration. That's very useful. We can perform the somatic components of spells even when we have weapons or shield in one or both hands. And this could potentially be essential to this character, depending how your DM interprets the focus that is required for casting Artificer spells. And I talked about that in last week's video. And as I mentioned in last week's video, my assumption is you will be able to perform somatic components using the hand that is holding your focus. And the focus in our case is going to be anything that's infused, like our lance is going to be infused. So as far as I read the rules and I interpret the rules, and I'm guessing the designer's intent, I don't think we actually need Warcaster to be able to cast our spells with our hands full. And then finally, we can get, with our opportunity attacks, we can cast a spell instead. I'm not sure how many opportunity attacks I'm going to be taking. I have a lot of things that I'm going to be using my reaction for. At this low level, I'll often be using my reaction just to ready my action. But there's also shield and absorb elements. So I'm not sure how many opportunity attacks I'm going to be taking. So other than the advantage on concentration saves, Warcaster isn't giving me a whole lot. But I do think boosting our concentration saves is a good idea. We are going to be concentrating on spells. We are going to be in melee. We are going to be attacked by enemies. We're going to have to be making those concentration saving throws. It helps that we are proficient in constitution saving throws already. It also helps that we have a really good constitution score. But you sometimes roll bad. And sometimes when you roll bad, you want to have another option, and that's where Lucky comes in. So we're going to grab Lucky instead of Warcaster under the assumption that I don't need to cast spells using the Warcaster feat when my hands are full. If your DM says otherwise, Warcaster is what you want here. But Lucky gives us more flexibility than Warcaster does. Warcaster is going to give us advantage on saving throws for concentration when we take damage. Lucky will provide advantage on any saving throw that you want. And that might be a concentration save, it might be a different kind of saving throw, or it might be advantage on something else. And it can be done after the fact. You roll your initial roll first, and if you need to, you use Lucky. So there's more flexibility there. I think it's better for this character, assuming we can cast with our hands full. At 4th level, we're still stuck with 1st level spells, but we do prepare another spell. So I think a spell that has really circumstantial use might be our best bet here. And Featherfall is probably the option I would pick. Something that is not going to come up very often, but this is essentially an extra on our list. We're still probably using Fairy Fire as our main use of 1st level spell slots, so Featherfall is just something that might come up once in a while. But let's jump to 5th level, because 5th level is a level where more things change. The big thing that happens at 5th level is now we are going to have extra attack. That means we're going to be able to attack twice using the attack action on our turn, which means we're probably not going to want to ready our action to take the attack action and lose out on this extra attack. So this is the point where I would switch the Steel Defender to a controlled mount. And as a controlled mount, again, by my interpretation, it will move on our turn. And that is something that's going to be essential with our extra attack. Other thing that happens at 5th level is we finally get access to our 2nd level spells. As a Battlesmith, we're going to have 2 spells always prepared. The first one is Branding Smite. This is a way you can add a little bit of extra damage to your attack, but honestly, I'm not a big fan of this spell, so it's probably not something I would cast very often. The other one that is always prepared is Warding Bond. This is one I might consider, because what it would do is you can touch a creature, gets a bonus to armor class, saving throws, and resistance to all damage, but every time it takes damage, we take the same amount. So essentially you're splitting up the damage, half for that creature, half for us. That might be useful if I have a character in the party that's always going down, because I do have a reasonable number of hit points. But the spell I'm definitely going to want to prepare here is Web. Web is a very powerful spell at this level, and it stays a very useful spell. I was just playing last week, and I used Web quite effectively with a 13th level character. It happens all the time, because you're hitting a number of creatures, they all have to make a saving throw, and if they fail, they're all restrained. And that is a very useful condition to be putting on people at any level. So despite the fact we're not a primary spellcaster, Web is still a great addition to our spell list. It's potentially the best 2nd level spell in the game. It's certainly close. So if I'm going to prepare that, I have to unprepare something. That's easy enough to do. We're going to go back and we're going to remove our alarm, and then we'll go back to 2nd level and get that Web prepared. That's probably how I'm going to be spending my 2nd level slots. Now I will say there are a number of good options for 2nd level slots to consider. So if you don't want to take Web, these are some other ones I would consider. Number 1, Aid. Just gives you more hit points, gives your allies more hit points. Has an 8-hour duration, doesn't use your concentration. And it's not temporary hit points, so it stacks with temporary hit points. So if you just want to build up the tankiness of your party, Aid is a good option for you. Another one I might consider is Blur. Because I am a martial character, Blur can give disadvantage on all attacks against me, but it will use my concentration, lasts only a minute, and it requires an action to cast. So there are some downsides there to consider as well. Another one I would consider is Heat Metal. Heat Metal, if you are fighting a creature that has metal on it, is really useful because it's damage that they cannot avoid. And they're going to take that damage round after round, especially if they're in armor. It just really screws them up. It's a little bit circumstantial because, again, not all creatures are holding or have metal. Some don't have equipment at all, in which case Heat Metal is not going to help you. But on those occasions where you're fighting a character that's maybe a lot like us, Heat Metal is going to wreck them. Another spell I might consider is Levitate. Levitate is a nice spell for its versatility because you can levitate yourself, you can levitate an ally, or you can levitate an enemy. And this can have some great tactical impacts on a combat. Finally, if you are in a situation where you're in a campaign and it's difficult to take a short rest, maybe you have one of those DMs or you're in one of those campaigns where there's always enemies around and it's just difficult to even get that 1 hour for a short rest, Rope Trick is a way around that. You cast Rope Trick, everyone goes up into the Rope Trick, they have their short rest. And then if you have characters in the party that have a lot of things that are recovered on a short rest, like fighters, like warlocks, like monks, Rope Trick can be a huge help to them. But with this character, we're going to take Web. We're probably going to use Web. And usually what I would do is if I'm going to use Fairy Fire or Web, it's going to be what I do on round 1. Then on round 2, I will enter melee. So we're going to go to level 6, and some important things happen at level 6. The big thing that's going to happen is I'm going to be adding a homunculus to my infusions. Now I can have 3 infusions working at this point, and if I want to use those infusions all on myself, then what I would do is I would infuse my lance, I would infuse my hand crossbow, and I would create a homunculus. The homunculus servant is going to be very useful to us, mainly because we're getting Force Strike, so now we have another use for our bonus action to add a little bit of damage to combat. Now it's a +4 to hit with D4 plus 2 force damage, not quite as good as the Steel Defender. Furthermore, it doesn't scale as quickly because our proficiency bonus is already +3, and it only improves when our proficiency bonus goes up, while Steel Defender has already scaled once. But the thing to remember about this is it is a 30-foot range, which means our homunculus does not have to enter melee with us. It can sit back and just give us that way to do a little bit of extra damage with our bonus action if we're not using it on anything else. Homunculus Servant is also going to be useful for us in other ways as well. We can use it mainly probably as a scout, right? Because it's a tiny construct, has dark vision, and it can fly, so it can go way above us, see what's all around the area, come back, let us know, that kind of thing. So homunculus is going to have other uses for us besides just adding a bonus action damage attack, but the bonus action damage attack is going to be a small bonus to our actual damage, but a significant one, so we'll be glad to have it. The other thing that's going to happen at level 6 is we're going to have some access to some new infusions. And there's a couple here that we're really going to want. Enhanced Defense is something we definitely want to be switching out at this level because what it's doing is giving us a +1 bonus to our armor class, so we can now take Repulsion Shield. This would also give us a +1 armor class, but in addition we're getting 4 charges. While holding it, the wielder can use a reaction immediately after being hit by a melee attack and use one of the shield's charges and push the attacker up to 15 feet away. The shield regains 1d4 expended charges daily at dawn. So think about this. We are using a lance. Something comes in and attacks us. It hits us. Then we can use our reaction to push it away, so we're not going to have to disengage from it so that we can attack it with our lance without disadvantage. So this is just going to be better for us than having a +1 bonus to our armor. So Repulsion Shield is an obvious switch here. I can only switch one thing. Otherwise, at this level, I might consider switching that Bag of Holding. I might consider switching the Enhanced Weapon. But we're going to get one new option. So instead of using Enhanced Weapon on our own lance, we're going to switch to Radiant Weapon, which is just going to be better at this level. So it's going to give us a +1 bonus to attack and damage rolls, which we already had with Enhanced Weapon. But we can also now use a bonus action to cause it to shed bright light in a 30-foot radius, dim light for an additional 30 feet. That's the same as a lantern, better than a light spell. Then it also has 4 charges. As a reaction immediately after being hit by an attack, can expend 1 charge and cause the attacker to be blinded until the end of the attacker's next turn, unless it succeeds on a Constitution saving throw against our spell DC. And then it gets back charges each day at dawn. That's really good. Now, obviously, I can't use this and Repulsion Shield, so it's going to depend on the situation. Some of the time, I might want to use the Repulsion Shield. Some of the time, I might want to use the Radiant Weapon. Both of them are going to give me something nice to do with my reaction if I get hit by an attack. Now, I might use the Shield spell to prevent getting hit by the attack in the first place. So I have a lot of reaction options here. And I'm not going to be using all of them. These 4 charges are probably never going to run out. Same thing with the Repulsion Shield. But it just gives me one more thing I can do. It's just objectively better than Enhanced Weapon at this level. So it's an obvious thing to take. We're also going to get another spell preparation. So again, I probably want to look at 2nd level spells. And I talked about 2nd level spells in detail already. And I think the one that I would take is Heat Metal, because Heat Metal is circumstantial. But I've got Web to be using most of the time. And then Heat Metal to use that once in a while when I'm coming up against an armored opponent. Final thing that happens at level 6, it's a pretty small thing, but we get tool expertise. So our proficiency bonus is doubled for any ability check we make that uses our proficiency with the tool. Definitely that's going to be things like lockpicking, as well as our standard tool stuff. And certainly if I'm doing something like disarming a trap or that kind of thing, I'd be definitely making sure that I can use my thieves tools for that, or any kind of tool I have to get that advantage. So I'm going to start jumping 2 levels at a time here, because things aren't moving super fast at these levels. But at level 8, a few different things happen. Level 7, first off, we're going to get Flash of Genius, and this allows us or an ally to, within 30 feet of us, making an ability check or saving throw, we can use our reaction to add the intelligence modifier to the roll. So our concentration now should be pretty safe. We have Lucky to fall back on if we need to. We have Flash of Genius to fall back on if we need to. Plus we have Proficiency in Constitution saving throws and a pretty good Constitution score. So our concentration should be safe. We really don't have to think about that anymore. But Flash of Genius, again, we might be using it for other things as well. And then we're going to get an ability score improvement. Now, we talked a lot about feats, and as I mentioned, there's not a lot of feats that really jump out as useful for this character. Now, what we could do is we could still take Crossbow Expert and Sharpshooter, and we could use those with our hand crossbow, and we would probably even do more damage with him. But I want to be using a lance, and so I'm going to be using the ability score improvement, get my intelligence up. Remember, intelligence isn't just affecting our spell DC, it's also affecting our chance to hit and our damage. At level 8, we're still using 2nd level spells, but we do have 3 slots now. One I would consider definitely is Aid. It's just a little bit more hit points for us. It could also be more hit points for our Steel Defender and another party member. And because we increase our intelligence, we can prepare yet another spell. And this is where I probably consider taking Rope Trick. So at this level, with our lance, we're looking at a +8 to hit, D12 plus 5 damage, 2 attacks around with reach. So that's pretty good. And then remember that if we're ever attacked, we have all kinds of options. We can cast a shield spell to try to turn into a miss. We can have our Steel Defender use its reaction to give them disadvantage on the attack roll. We could do an Absorb Elements if we are attacked with any kind of energy damage. We can use our Bashing Shield to push somebody 15 feet away who's hit us with an attack. Or we could use our Radiant Weapon to impose blindness on them if they hit us with an attack. So our reactions are full. So we're going to move on to 10th level. Now 9th level is a big level for this character because at 9th level 2 things happen. The first thing that's going to happen is we're going to get Arcane Jolt. Now Arcane Jolt is really going to help us out here because what it's going to do is it's going to give us a chance to boost our damage as well as our healing. And we can do this a number of times equal to our intelligence modifier. Remember, we increased our intelligence at level 8, so we're looking at a +4 modifier, meaning we can use this 4 times. Adds 2d6 force damage. Force damage is the kind of damage you want to add because almost nothing is resistant or immune to it. And then you choose one creature or object you see within 30 feet, and it restores 2d6 hit points to it. Now, we can only use this once a turn, and we only get it back after a long rest. So what I would consider with an Arcane Jolt is we're probably going to be using it maybe about on one of every 5 attacks. Where do I want to use it? If I roll a critical. If I roll a critical hit, you want to use an Arcane Jolt, because then you're going to be adding 46 force damage. So I would probably save them till either we're in a battle where things are turning against us and we need every advantage we can get, or until I roll a critical. If I roll a critical, I'll throw on the Arcane Jolt, get an additional 46 points of damage. Other thing that happens at 9th level that's really big is access to 3rd level spells. And we'll get into those, but those are really important to this character. One thing that happens at 10th level is we're going to get 2 more infusions known, and 1 more we can have active at one time. And I've got to think that somebody in the party is going to get use out of Boots of the Winding Path, so that's one thing I'll take. The other thing I'm going to take is I'm going to get the Replicate Magic Item. I'm going to have a lot more options here for that ability. This is the list, and it's long, and there are some really good stuff here. Bracers of Archery would be huge if you were playing that crossbow expert kind of artificer. They would be a must-have at 10th level. For me, the one that stands out are the Winged Boots, because this is flight, and it's flight for up to 4 hours, and you can split those 4 hours up. So Winged Boots are a really nice item. They use your attunement slot. I might not keep them for myself because I'm not sure how perfect they are for a mounted character, unless my DM was to say that the Steel Defender could wear Winged Boots. I probably wouldn't allow that. So I would probably give these to another party member, but I think they're good enough and kind of a standout here that I would almost certainly take them. The other ones that I would really consider, depending on the party, Cloak of Protection. This is one thing that I find often comes up in campaigns anyways, but if it doesn't, it's bonus to armor class and saving throws. Eyes of the Eagle are going to be huge for a character that really relies on perception, like your party scout. And remember too, their passive perception goes up as well when you have advantage. That's a +5 to the passive perception. Gauntlets of Ogre Power might be really useful if you have the kind of character that maybe has multiple ability score dependency. Something like maybe a melee cleric. They might be sitting on a 14 strength. Giving them a 19 strength would be massive for them. Of course, if you're playing the kind of artificer that didn't increase their intelligence at level 8, a headband of intellect might be useful for you to make sure you get that +4 bonus. I find it interesting that they have the Helm of Telepathy and Medallion of Thoughts on the same list, because the Helm of Telepathy is better. If you want to have detect thoughts, take the Helm of Telepathy. You can use so without using charges, and you can use the suggestion spell on creatures that you have successfully detected the thoughts of. So it's just better. But in the case of our character, I'm going to take the Winged Boots. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go from my Repulsion Shield, and I'm going to switch it back to the Enhanced Defense, because now the Enhanced Defense is going to give me a +2 instead of a +1. So it is now arguably better than the Repulsion Shield. So let's look at our spells. And if we look at our known spells, we're now going to have access to 3rd level spells. We're also going to have access to an additional cantrip. The cantrip I would consider at this point is now Firebolt, because we're at the point where it is scaled once, but it's going to scale again right away. So now it's going to do 3d10 damage. That's probably going to be just about as good damage as we're doing with our repeating crossbow. So it is reasonable to take it now, and that's going to save us an infusion. We don't have to use that repeating shot anymore, or we might use that repeating shot on somebody else's crossbow. But we get access to our 3rd level spells here, and the one that we definitely want to take is Haste. When you are a melee character at 3rd level, Haste is a good choice for you. It's going to give us a +2 bonus to our armor class, advantage on dexterity saving throws, and it gives us an additional attack every round. So this is a decent defensive boost and a big offensive boost for us. Now the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my 1st level spells, and now I'm going to get rid of my Fairy Fire spell, because I'm going to be concentrating on Haste or Web in combat. I would do one or the other. I probably wouldn't do Fairy Fire very often, unless there was just a huge long day where you used all your hastes, you used all your webs, and you still needed more. But I don't think that's going to happen very often. Most likely I'm going to use those 1st level slots, maybe for a shield spell, but maybe for something in addition to a web spell or in addition to a haste spell. And that's when we want to switch to Grease. Because now we're at that point I talked about earlier in the video where concentration is becoming more valuable. So switching off Fairy Fire for Grease makes a lot of sense right now. The last thing we're going to get at 10th level that I'm just going to talk about briefly is Magic Item Adept, because it's going to allow us to attune up to 4 magic items at once. It is hard for me to tell you what those items are going to be because, of course, what you come across in campaigns is going to vary from campaign to campaign. But at 10th level, it is very likely there's going to be magic items in your party that no one has attunement slots for, and you can just add it on to yourself. The other thing it's going to add is your ability to craft items is going to improve. But I talked about this in the last video as well, that it really depends on your DM, on how much use you're going to get out of this. It depends on what formula you're able to find. It depends on how much downtime you're going to have. But potentially, this could be also really useful for you. But now we're going to jump to level 12. And level 12 is where we really start to pull away from our baseline in terms of damage. We're going to get our ability score improvement, and we're going to get our intelligence up to 20. So now we're going to have the maximum intelligence score. It's going to give our maximum to hit score. It's going to give our maximum amount of damage. It is also going to make our spell DCs as good as any primary spellcaster. And that's something you tend not to get with a secondary spellcaster, is often you can't afford to be putting your casting stat up to 20 because we're going to be significantly better at casting spells than other secondary spellcasters are. Then we have our spell storing item, very useful item. We can put a first or second level spell in the item, and it requires 1 action to cast, and whoever's holding it is the one that's going to be using the item and concentrating on the item. And it is not necessary for us to have the spell prepared after we've created the spell storing item. So we can create a spell storing item in off time, and then we can go back to our regular prepared spells on the next day. So things I might consider are things like the blur spell, because if you've got a character that is a martial character that doesn't use their concentration, blur is a way to get disadvantage on all attacks against them, and they're not using the concentration for anything else. Something like Fairy Fire might also be something you throw in a spell storing item, or Web might be something you throw in a spell storing item. Definitely, if you have something in your party like a familiar, or you have some lowly NPC that's not able to come into combat with you, they're perfect for a spell storing item because those are just actions waiting to be used. So if we look at our level 12, we're going to see that haste is added on to my calculations. We're also assuming that I'm Arcane Jolting maybe 20% of the time. Now this is a hard one to guess. If we're attaching it to criticals, it might actually even be more than this, but this was kind of my guess. So in the end, we're looking at about 34 points of damage around compared to a baseline of 27. So that's reasonably higher than that, and that is pretty good considering we're not using Great Weapon Mastery or using Sharpshooter. So going to level 14, first thing that happens is we're going to get additional infusions. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to grab 2 more infusions, and we're definitely going to want to take them off the magic item table. The Artificer can get some really powerful items at 14th level. Amulet of Health will give somebody a Constitution score of 19. Now, that would be an advantage to us, but I would probably be looking at giving it to another party member because we at least have a Constitution of 16. Belt of Hill Giant Strength will get somebody a Strength score of 21. Bracers of Defense, of course, are huge for any character that doesn't wear armor. Gem of Seeing gets you True Sight up to 120 feet. Horn of Blasting is useful. I find rather than using it as a blast in combat, it's just useful for things like taking down walls that are in your way. Now, I don't know for sure what items are going to be of greatest use, but I'm sure Amulet of Health is going to be useful to somebody. If not us, probably somebody else will get even more advantage out of it than we would. So that is one I would probably take almost all the time. And I'm just betting somebody is going to get use out of that Belt of Hill Giant Strength. So let's grab those 2. So the big thing that happens here, 14th level, Magic Item Savant. We can now attune up to 5 magic items. It's hard for me to tell you exactly how useful that's going to be. It depends on the campaign, but it's always going to be useful. There's going to be 5 items that you want to attune to, and normally you would have to pick 3 of them. And we can now basically use any magic item we want. This includes things like scrolls from other classes. So those 5 magic items, we're going to have more flexibility in which of the items we can choose as well. Other thing at 14th level is we are getting more spells. So we're going to get another cantrip. At 14th level, we don't really care what cantrip this is going to be. Let's take Prestidigitation. It can always be a fun thing to have. And then we're going to get 4th level spells. We also have 3 preparations here. We're going to have Aura of Purity all the time. It's okay. And Fire Shield all the time. Fire Shield can be useful because it's not concentration. Also, if we take damage in combat, we can do damage to the person who hurt us. But what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to go back to 3rd level and grab Dispel Magic. That's going to be a very useful spell for us. I'm also going to want to grab Fly, also another spell that comes up when you need it. You really, really need it. And then for 4th level spells, I'm going to get 1 selection. And I would take either Autoluke's Resilient Sphere, which is a good control spell, or Arcane Eye, which is a good utility spell. I would probably take Arcane Eye because I have a fair number of things I can do in combat, and because I'm going to be doing weapon attacks most of the time, that leaves less room for spellcasting during combat. But Arcane Eye is something that I would be doing outside of combat. I'm going to take this character to 17th level, and 17th level is a big boost for this character because we're getting our 5th level spells. And the spell I recommend for this character is Animate Objects. So Animate Objects is going to give us 10 tiny objects we can animate. Each one is going to have a +8 to hit for 1d4 plus 4 damage. So that's 10 additional attacks every round using our bonus action. This is going to require a concentration, so we're not going to be using this in addition to haste. We're not going to be using it in addition to homunculus or steel defender attacks. This replaces those things. Of course, we're not going to be casting this every combat. We don't have a lot of slots, so this is going to be for the big fight. Other thing that happens is our Arcane Jolt has improved. It now does 46 damage. Our Steel Defender gets a +2 bonus to armor class, and whenever it uses its Deflect Attack, the attacker takes force damage. Not very much, but at least some. And we get another ability score improvement. Honestly, at this point, I would definitely take a feat, because nothing is going to give us a boost like Intelligence is. So this is a great point for us to choose a feat. And I think I'll take Tough. Tough is just going to increase our hit points by 2 points per level. That's a big hit point boost for us. So what happens at 17th level is we're going to add our animated objects into our calculations. And that's why I have 2 totals here. So the 51 points of damage on average assumes that the creature I'm attacking is not resistant to the damage of the animated objects. If we do that, then we can see that this is a huge boost over our level 17 baseline. The 36.2 is if they are resistant to that damage. And note that even if they are resistant to the animated object's damage, we're still above our baseline. It's close, but we're above. So we're still being effective with damage. So what we found is that this character, and not much changes to level 20 at this point. So what we find is that this character from level 3 to level 17 is able to achieve over baseline damage, not by a huge amount, but by enough that we're going to be effective in combat as a damage dealer. But in addition to that, we're going to be able to do control. We're going to be able to use Fairy Fire spells at level 3 to impact combat. We're going to eventually be able to use web spells to impact combat. So when it comes to control, there's some of that mixed in as well. And when it comes to durability, this character is really good. We're going to have a good armor class with this character. Hard to say what it's going to end up being at high levels because it depends what kind of magic items we have. But if we want, we can have a magic shield and magic half plate just using our infusions alone. Because if we take the repulsion shield plus our enhanced armor, then we can do both shield and armor at the same time. Now probably we're just going to do the enhanced armor, but we may have a magic shield anyway. And we have our 14 dexterity, so we're getting our maximum dexterity bonus in addition to our half plate armor. And then we have the shield spell when we need it. So our armor class is going to be quite good. And then when we do take damage, because we boosted our constitution at the beginning, we're going to have the number of hit points that's comparable to martial characters. But in addition, when we use our Arcane Jolt, we can actually heal ourselves at the same time we're damaging our enemies. So this character really ends up being more of a tank than just a damage dealer. And if you are going to use the crossbow expert, you're just a damage dealer. This character is going to be intended to take hits as well as deliver them. And if they attack our steel defender instead of us, that's great, because that's just way more hits we can take. So that is the Gnome Techno-Knight. Next week, I'm going to be looking at a cybernetic beastmaster build. So I hope you'll join me then. Until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, have some fun. D&D's for everyone. Thanks, Optimancers, and I'll see you next time.